So, I've never written a book. I just thought I'd put out my great Undone right there. I've just never written a book. I've read a bunch of them. By the time my dad was my age, he had written more than I've probably read at this point. And it's something that I've always wanted to do. It's not that I haven't wanted to, and it's not that I haven't been busy doing other things. I have been. I've been raising 3 children with my wife, who's right over there, and amazing. I have been writing music and traveling the world playing music. I've been able to speak in many different countries and on many different continents. I've had the opportunity to work with people who are homeless, to work with people in all across the world that are in need. I have had wonderful opportunities in my life, but I've never written a book. And the problem is something like this. It's not because I haven't been unbusy or effective in what I've done. What I haven't really had is a framework in which to take all these wonderful and creative ideas and put them together in an innovative way. What I've done, while it's been a lot of fun and kind of all over the place, has not been well designed. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to have a designed faith. And I often wonder, as I've turned 46 and getting close to that 50, which is the beginning of middle age. I live in Loma, which is a blue zone, so I'm definitely going to live to 100. I have no problem with that. The only problem is that I've started riding a motorcycle, so I think statistically that changes some things for me, very perhaps. But I always go back to what one of my mentors, who I met when he was in his 90s, Dr. Will Alexander, said. I was sitting next to him in a meeting one time, and I said, Dr. Alexander, why do you still do this? Why do you still round with your patients? You don't have to do any of this anymore. You've been retired for like 50 years already. I'm not real great with math. And he looked at me and he said, I've done my best work since I was 70 years old. Why would I stop now? And so I think there's still hope. And in my time, both in ministry and then moving on to a short time and a short little excerpt in healthcare, I was lucky enough to sit with some of the most innovative people and most thoughtfully designed people in the world. I was lucky to work with Landon Morris from Innovation Labs, who just happens to do things like train the innovators in China as a side job for himself, or go and experience the innovation labs that they have at Frog Labs up in San Francisco, or do experience design tours and spend time at their experience design house in Colorado with Sterizen. I learned a new language. I learned a new framework. I learned a new way to think about my life. It changed everything for me. It was like they were speaking a language that I had always known kind of intrinsically, but no one had ever taught to me, and now it was being taught to me. I had found my tribe, and you know what it's like to find your tribe? Life changes. And in fact, growing up, I was always considered a creative. Teachers didn't love it. But I'll say creative with my quotation marks, because during class I would always do what was absolutely the best use of my time, which was dreaming about the way things could be, rather than thinking about the way things are, which has to do with homework and math. You see, I grew up in a home where creativity was encouraged, where a do-it-yourself ethos was absolutely important, and where entrepreneurship was encouraged as well. I grew up thinking sky's the limit. This caused me to do some very strange things. One, to start a rock band while I was in seminary getting a Master's of Divinity degree, whatever that is. The second one is to put coffee shops pretty much every single place that I worked. But because I didn't have a good framework or a good infrastructure for this kind of thinking, I thought I was an anomaly. I thought I was an outlier. Meeting Innovation taught me my native tongue. And I would listen to these guys and women as they would talk about what is phenomenal about innovation and design thinking and experience design. And I would think as they started their sentences, I need to listen carefully, because by the end of this sentence, the rest of my life will change. This was a phenomenal learning for me a little bit later on in life. The only problem is this: I work in faith. And faith is not considered to be very innovative. Churches don't change. People of faith often don't change. It's barely creative, but it is actually incredibly important. Pew did a research study in 2015 where they asked 35,000 adults how important faith was. 53% said it was very important. 11% said it was important but not very important. That's 64% of their polling group that said it is important for them. If we just take that number 53% and scale it to, let's say, just America, that's 162 million people that say faith is very important to them. Another Pew Research study that was done from 2012 to 2017 broke it down like this. About 48% of those polled said that they were both religious and spiritual. Now, this is down from 59% in 2012, but even though that seems like a frightening statistic, the landscape of faith in America is actually relatively stable, but it's shifting. It looks different. Those who said that they were spiritual and not religious went to 27%. Now, this is up from 19% in 2012. This means that a quarter of the population believes that they are spiritual but not religious. There was about 18% that said that they did not feel as if they were religious or spiritual. This is up just 2%, so that's a good statistic that it's not raising that high. And then there's this weird little group, 6%, that believe that they're religious but not spiritual at all. And you wonder if they just don't understand the definition of the terms. But as I work in faith, and we're just going to use the term faith to kind of cover spirituality and religion and all that's put in there, so we're not talking about one specific group. As a pastor, as a community builder, there's this question that you are assumed to ask people. And it's a strange question. It's a question that has perplexed me forever. And the question is simply this: how is your spiritual life? I never know what they're supposed to answer. And this is what happens. I would ask at the beginning of my career, how's your spiritual life? And they would say to me, oh, it's pretty good. Could be better because we want to be humble, right? We don't want to be proud of our spiritual life. That seems weird, right? God and I are good. He likes me a lot. You can't say things like that. So you say essentially it's pretty good, could be better. After about 100 of those, I realized I don't think I know what I'm asking. Because I never knew what people were asking me when this question would come up. Are you asking me how much I pray? Are you asking me what I think about compassion and how often I'm engaged in that kind of work? Are you asking me about specific religious practices? What are you asking me when you talk about how is your spiritual life? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But it is assumed that I will ask this question. Now, going back to those statistics that we had just looked at, we can learn 3 things about faith in people's life. Number 1, spirituality, religion, faith are important to the majority of people that we live, work, pray, and play with. Number 2, there's a rise in those that don't necessarily associate or identify with religion specifically, but faith is still important. And number 3, it's simply this: there is work to be done. Now, as my primary vocation, that question of how is your spiritual life constantly made me question what it was I was asking about, because there's not a lot of metrics. I mean, there are some metrics when it comes to faith and faith maturity. There's faith maturity scales, intrinsic faith questions, extrinsic faith questions. Faith and Health has done a lot of work around this area. Dr. Koenig and Dr. Gary Gunderson. Faith and health go hand in hand, and what they've begun to realize is that these things, faith and health, are not separate things. And as I worked in faith and health for a little while, I began to realize more succinctly that the problem we have when it comes to asking this incomplete question, how is your spiritual life, is because we have somehow bifurcated the idea of our lives and our spiritual lives. It is an incomplete question. Our lives are integrated wholes. Simply said, we don't have a faith life, we have a life, and faith is a part of it. Because, and we all know this, life is a whole, not a part. Everything affects everything. 80% of the work that has been done in faith and health has centered around mental illness. And what we know is that people who say or claim some sort of faith deal better with things like optimism, depression, anxiety, self-esteem. The list goes on and on. There are direct correlations between an individual's ability to deal with adversity, positive emotions, well-being, and happiness, as well as, again, optimism, meaning and purpose, self-esteem, sense of control, anxiety, depression, and even more. Faith matters in every aspect of our lives. I would go so far as to say this: to separate life from faith is to destroy the very essence of our own humanity. Faith is what humans do. Faith in each other. Faith in those chairs you're sitting in. We do faith. And to deny this is to cut off a proverbial arm. Why? Because faith asks big questions. And we as human beings want bigger answers. Meaning, purpose, trajectory, questions more important than even the myriad of answers we give to them. And in fact, so many of us, as we live our lives, realize that asking big questions is an avocation for most of us. This avocation, this thing we do for love and not for money, is something that we are deeply engaged in and becomes a wayfinding process for each of us, and we live the answers. We live the answers because life is liturgy. The idea that liturgy, which is the work of the people, and we understand that our lives are this liturgy, what we believe, who we are, how we interact, what our core values and principles are, they all come out in our lives, in our liturgical lives, if we could use that term. It oozes out of our pores. It lives in our children as they catch our narratives and questions, and finds a dwelling place within us and within our society as a whole. And if it's that important, we need to think differently about faith than we have in the past. And so, having been exposed to design thinking and experienced design and innovation, I began to say, hey, is there a way that we can marry these two subjects? Faith, which is kind of, I cannot whistle today, out there, and the hard, concrete science of innovation. Is there a way to put design thinking towards this? Design thinking is simply a methodology used by designers to solve complex problems and find desirable solutions for their clients. Design thinking draws upon logic, imagination, intuition, and systemic reasoning to explore possibilities of what could be and to create desired outcomes that benefit the end user, the customer for designers, but you for people of faith. And that doesn't sound very faith-like, but I assure you that it is. The problem is we have to take a second and look at what the metrics of faith are. If life and faith are connected and a connected whole, and especially if they are important to the majority of people around us, perhaps we should be finding ways in which to design our faith lives so they might manifest in our actions and attitudes in more demonstrable ways. But again, we need metrics. So I started looking around to find some kind of broad and general metrics, and these are the ones that I came up with. You can come up with your own list for your lives, but these are the ones that resonate with me. Some of them come from the World Happiness Report of 2017. Some come from a book called Beyond Religion by the Dalai Lama, but it begins with this: mutual trust. As we become a people who trust one another, we see faith beginning to grow. After that, shared purpose. Once we trust one another, we can find a shared purpose and live together, no matter what we say we believe in. This leads to generosity, a generosity of spirit and a generosity of soul, so that the world might be a place where peace of mind reigns beyond conflict. This peace of mind gives us time in our lives when we don't have the same sort of anxiety, and certainly the same sort of anxiety about our neighbors or our neighborhood. We begin to become a more compassionate people, and that compassion always leads to hope. Innovation and design thinking can help us move from faith as an idea or a concept to the manifestation of purpose. If faith is our search for the purpose or our existence, innovation and design is how we connect to and manifest purpose through ideas and or products. So what we're talking about is a designed faith, and we will move quickly A designed faith starts and must have a process to get us towards those metrics. And so in 3 minutes, let me see if I can give them to you. The first thing we have to do is begin to uncover. This is the desire and ability to look at your life's narrative and connect it with who you are. To discover the metric you are looking for and see how it works in your life is to uncover the problem or trajectory we are looking to move towards. Uncover, and then we prepare. And we have a saying in my work, in our church. Our saying is this: prepare, never plan. As we don't know where the iterative process will take us, and we certainly don't know in our lives of faith, it is important to prepare for where we might go, not plan for where we should go. We look for patterns and symbols that mean something. We uncover them, and we uncover the why of them, and we continue on. After we prepare and after we've set the foundation of where we want to go in our trajectory, we begin to consume. And we begin to consume a vast and varied amount of information. This is where you have to take on a myriad of things, because wisdom and inspiration requires learning, or at least the consumption of ideas and practices. And it needs to be across the board. The best experience I ever had, I should not say that, it's not the best experience. The weirdest experience I ever had was picking up a knitting magazine because I wanted to read something different when I got on a plane. That's different. And you all assume I don't knit. I don't. But the point being, I was reading this knitting magazine, learning lots about things I will probably never use. The guy next to me was fascinated. I gave him the magazine at the end of the day. Consume, because once we consume and we are inspired and we are motivated, we can begin to create. This is where we experiment, we explore, and we envision of what our lives of faith might be, and we don't do this alone. People of faith are not lonely. People of faith come together in community. Through this creation, we begin to manifest. See what is becoming from the previous work that we've been doing. Take a metric test. Are you leaning into those things that we talked about before? Or the process is moving you in a different direction. Evaluate what's going on in your life and change it if it is not working. And in fact, this is the very next point: fail. Fail fast, but always fail forward. Prototype in your life of faith and see what works. Iterate around what doesn't and see if in that ideation, you might be able to create a better process to try and become a person that values faith and lives into, manifest those ideas that we say are so core to who we are. In any form of faith, there's going to be a simple matter of trust, and that fits in the process as well. Simply this: trust your instincts. If it isn't you, it isn't right. We shouldn't hold on to what doesn't work. User interface has to be natural. It has to be natural on your phone. Why wouldn't it be natural in your life of faith as well? And lastly, as you do this, as you iterate, as you work your way through, then you take a look and you say, hey, how can I share this with people? Because we learn from one another. We tell the world as we make sense out of it. And sometimes we'll still make the road by walking on it, as Brian McLaren says, but we share it. And this is not proselytization for a particular kind of faith. Rather, this is the invitation through mutual trust to find shared purpose together. I thought I'd just read the last sentence here. A designed faith, perhaps, means a more trustful world. A world where generosity is bigger than scarcity and jealousy. Where shared purpose transcends tribal and cultural boundaries. Where compassion is the deepest and most sought after value. Where peace of mind is assured. And where hope becomes the wayfinder and the anchor point of our lives. A designed faith can bring us to these things if we're willing to pair the most innovative thinking with some of the most oldest faith that the world has ever seen. And I don't know, to me, this sounds like it would be a good book. Thank you, guys.